In this lesson, we're looking at digestion and absorption, so our two main points are there. Right, so when it comes to obtaining energy, we know that there are organisms which are autotrophs and can create their own compounds, organic compounds, and heterotrophs which need to obtain their energy from consuming other organisms. And the nutrients that we need in our body cannot be synthesized from what's inside of us, so we need to ingest those chemicals, and those chemicals come to us in the form of, say, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and then we break them down into their essential building blocks. So remember, these are macronutrients. They are very large molecules, and they are made up of those monomer building blocks. So we can define digestion as the process of breaking down food into essential nutrients to be absorbed and delivered into cells. Essentially, we are an open tube from mouth to anus with supporting organs around us. Very pretty to think about. The food passes through this tube, it's broken down into smaller compounds, and then it is absorbed. So again, we're talking about breaking down those macromolecules, and eventually the compounds in our body that are not or cannot be used are removed as waste. The organs of note in our digestive system include the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestines, large intestines, the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. And there's some bits and pieces thrown in there as well. And many parts of the digestive tract that runs from our mouth to our anus, they have very similar anatomy because they're part of that long-running tube. And the inside of the tube is coated with an epithelial layer known as the mucosa. And it's those cells that are doing part of the absorbing of the nutrients as well. Now, the space that runs in between us, so think about the part of the hose where the water comes out, that's called the lumen, so you might hear those words throughout. Now, the layers of the wall of the tube are pretty consistent throughout different parts of the digestive tract, and that's not including some of the accessory organs like the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder. Now, each location has different functions, so the epithelial layer, the inside layer, needs to have slightly different structures. Now, in the small intestines, for example, where most of the absorption occurs, the surface area of the inner lining is increased. So it has these villi here, which are projections of the epithelium, or that inner layer. The blood supply runs really closely behind a single layer of these cells, and that allows for a diffusion to occur of nutrients and water. And most of the absorption of nutrients is occurring in the small intestines, hence the need for all these villi. Alright, so the layers of the small intestine tissue is really important. It's got a mucosa, or those inner lining layers with the high surface area to volume ratio, It's got a submucosa which sits just underneath, and it contains those blood, the capillaries for that absorption to occur. There's a muscle layer which is circular, alright, so squeeze inwards, and longitudinal so it can move that way, and it's also got an outer layer holding it all together. Alright, aside from the digestive anatomy, there are other requirements for a functioning digestive system, and this includes surfactants and enzymes that are used to break up lipid molecules and catalyze reactions respectively. So these can be produced in the cells lining the stomach, for example, in intestines, as well as the accessory glands, and secreted via ducts into the digestive tract. So we might be talking about the gallbladder, the pancreas, and the salivary glands here. There are three main steps in digestion. There is mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, and then the absorption of the nutrients. Sorry, that was a bit quick. So the first act of digestion is mechanical. Chewing is the first part of this, and it's for breaking down large chunks of food with the teeth and the tongue using a grinding action. It's also known as mastication, and this increases the surface area of the food for its next step. The food is then swallowed. It moves down as a bolus down the esophagus, and an epiglottis covers your trachea or your windpipe so that food doesn't go down the wrong way, and the uvula stops it from going up into your nasal cavity as well. Now, once swallowed, your really muscular stomach moves the food around and mixes it with acid, and the food is now known as chyme. Now, peristalsis is a wave of muscle contractions in circular and longitudinal smooth muscle in the digestive tract. So after the stomach, the chyme is mixed with some enzymes and it's moved down the digestive tract, and the enzymes speed up the breakdown of that semi-digested food. The peristalsis, though, it keeps the food moving using short bursts of vigorous contractions, right? And it's going to push it from behind and squeeze it all around that tube as well. So there's circular muscles doing that squeezing together, but there's also longitudinal muscles that keep it going all the way. Now, it's unconsciously controlled, though your muscles can take over if, say, food is coming up the other way. This is happening without you thinking about it. But it is very slow. In the small intestines, a few centimeters at a time, it's going really, really slowly, and that's going to allow for absorption of the nutrients. Now, while mechanical digestion is occurring, chemical digestion is happening simultaneously. Now, in the mouth, there are enzymes, and we'll talk more about them later, but there's also stomach acid, which lowers the pH to about 2, and that's going to allow denature of proteins. And the stomach is really well designed to look after itself so it doesn't actually burn through its own cells. And the pancreas is an accessory organ which makes an alkaline material that once the chyme moves out of the stomach, it's really acidic. It needs to add this alkaline material in to neutralize it as it moves into the small intestines. Bile is made in the gallbladder, and it's a bit of an emulsifier. It breaks down lipids into small droplets. The smaller the droplets, the bigger the surface area, so enzymes can work on them. Now, the pancreas secretes enzymes into the lumen, or the space in the small intestines, and the pancreas also has an endocrine function. It produces insulin and glucagon, but the digestive juices are made in different cells, so it has two functions there. And once you start eating, your nervous system and stomach give the pancreas cues to secrete these enzymes to start breaking things down. It's important to think about the enzymes, and we have lots of different kinds. We have amylases that break down carbohydrates. We have lipases, which break down lipids, proteases, which break down proteins, and nucleases, which break down the DNA and RNA material that comes in from your plant and animal material that you're consuming. This is a really nice image to summarize all the enzymatic digestion. So there's quite a lot of them there, but you'll see that they mostly all end in ASE, which is that clue that they are an enzyme. Most of them are secreted into the lumen. Some are actually stuck on the walls of cells in the epithelial lining. Finally, once all this mechanical and chemical digestion is done, the small intestines manage the majority of the absorption of the nutrients. Once they're absorbed, the nutrients have to go to the bloodstream to be taken around, so the surface area available has to be really, really large. The small intestine, if you unravel, it's about 7 meters long, and it's about 2.5 centimeters wide as a tube. So the folds of the inner lining are really important, and there are about 40 of these villi per square millimeter. And then on top of the villi, there are microvilli to increase the surface area even further. Remember, once the cells of the small intestine, absorb the monomers, they still have to be transported into the bloodstream. So the monomers will be absorbed into the villi, they'll transport across the membrane, then they'll have to transport across the cell, and then across the membrane on the other side of the cell. So all those types of membrane transports that we talked about, that's what's happening all the time. It has to go in, and then out, and then into the bloodstream, and then, to be dissolved wherever and taken wherever. So the main ideas center around the surface area in the small intestines and the structures in the villi, as well as the digestive enzyme. But it's important to look at the big picture as well, so we see how all these elements fit in.